back, I think my first involvement in saltwater fly fishing probably stems back to adventures along the Tamiami Trail Canal, a canal that runs all the way from Miami across the state to Tampa. And as kids, we used to plug cast for snook in that canal religiously when we should have been in school. Myself and Chico and Norman Duncan and John Emery. And one day, plug fishing there, we drove up in my ancient pickup on two guys who were fly fishing for snook on the trail. First time I had ever seen it. It was Ted Williams and a guy named Rocky Weinstein. They were buddies and fly fished the trail for snook all the time. And Chico and I stood there and watched these men fly cast and were amazed. I mean, we had no idea what they were doing or why, and we followed them for hours, watching them catch snook on a fly rod. And we knew immediately that we had to do this.
Another person that influenced my career quite a bit because of his philosophy and his way of thinking was Lee Wolf. Lee taught me first to push and experiment and research to the limit. I would say to Lee, a 9-foot rod is a good all-around rod for saltwater fly fishing. And you can go up to maybe, you can reduce a rod to maybe 8 foot, 8 inches. A short rod like that would be good to fish the shorelines for snook and so on. And Lee would say, how do you know it isn't 8'6" or 8'1", or have you tried it? No, I haven't. You got to keep trying and go lower and lower until you have a 7-foot rod and you know it's too low, then you come back up again. But until you've done that, you don't know.
Being an ex-fighter pilot, being a fighter pilot in the Navy, you had to have good eyesight. And I was blessed, as I say many times. One of the times was having 20/10 eyesight. Ted Williams also had 20/10 eyesight. We met in 1948 and became very fast friends for the next 50 years. We fished in a lot of places together, in a lot of countries together. Ted and I used to, we had friendly fights, you might call it. We'd bet, make a dollar bet on this or on that, or what, maybe a fight bet, a football bet, a baseball bet, but we did a lot of fishing bets. And the one who could see the fish first, if we were bone fishing or tarpon fishing. Now, Ted had an advantage, even though we both had the same 20/10 eyesight, near and far. His advantage was that he was a lot taller than I was. And when you have height, it's easier to penetrate through the surface of the water. I used to tell people how to look through the water.
Had a little conversation about fly rodding and stuff, and I said, here, Lefty, I want you to try my rod and see what you think about it. And he cast it a few times, and he said, Nat, that's the worst rod I've ever seen in my life. He said, in fact, the best thing for you to do is to sell it as quick as you can, or that, give it away. So I got rid of it and got one of the new scientific angler rods that had just come out. And it was far surpassing anything that I'd ever used before.
The lefty deceiver was conceived out of a thing of aggravation again. Tom Cofield was the outdoor editor for the Baltimore News American paper, and I was writing for a small newspaper in Central Maryland. And we used to go down to Crisfield, Maryland on Chesapeake Bay, where they had a crab packing plant. And of course, you couldn't do this today, but at the end of the day, they would pack the meat in cans and just shovel everything with a snow shovel off the dock, which created the greatest chum line you've ever seen. Well, all these rockfish, or striped bass, which we call rockfish in Maryland, would come in every evening and just gorge themselves on all these parts of crabs. Well, you could throw a fly in there and it was like rolling a wine bottle in a jail cell. I mean, something was going to jump on it right away. So we were fly casting, but almost all the flies in those days had a chenille body and a feather wing, and they would underwrap, and oddly enough, even though those fish were in a feeding frenzy, they would not hit a fouled fly. So on the way back, it's a 3-hour drive, 4-hour drive actually in those days with a Model A Ford. But on a 4-hour drive back home, I told Tom, I said, I'm going to design a fly that won't foul, that has a bait fish shape, that you can change size on it, and we're going to go back there and try it. And I did, and for the first couple of years, I just made an all-white deceiver. Nowadays, we have them in all different kinds of colors and all sizes, but this is basically what a deceiver is. It's nothing more than some hackles which are tied at the back so they wouldn't foul, they don't underwrap. And then you have a bucktail, and of course this thing is shaped like a fish. And then one of the things that's important is when this water goes back here and comes off of these bucktail here, which a collar, it actually puts many waves on here to make this work. And if it's wet, you can see that thing looks just like a fish when it's wet. And for many years, all I used was just white. Then I went to red and then different colors. And later on, put the eyes on. But this fly is used all over the world today. And it have many people that put their names on it. And I really don't care as long as they use it and have fun.
Of course, when I was pulling the boat from the top of the motor, I figured I was going to fall off there and hurt myself. So I made a little drawing of a platform to go up above the motor and I took it, this little drawing down to Bob Hughes while I was running a Hughes Moan Fishing. And he had the first pulling platform welded out of aluminum tubing by pipe welders who built tuna towers and things like that. But the first pulling platform that came in, Hal Chedham was working as a salesman for Bob Hughes down at his shop on the Miami River, and he grabbed it and put it on his boat. So I didn't get the very first one that's built. So, and I was a little mad about that, so I went to some welder up on Southwest 72nd Avenue and had him give my drawing and had him to build me up weld up my first pulling platform. And at that time I was fishing for the big tarpon during the month of May and June up at Homosassa. And the first time I went up there with that pulling platform on the boat, one of the guides up there, they were laughing at me, and one of them said, "What you got on there, Curtis? A fish cleaning platform?" I said, "No, it's to keep the motor in the shade. It makes it run cooler." You know, I just gave him the same back. And so I was the first guide up there to ever use the platform. They'd never seen any. But within about 6 or 8 years, every guide up there had a pulling platform.
And I remember seeing a group of tarpon about a quarter of a mile at least away, just a black spot, and watching them get closer and closer and closer. The water was perfectly clear in those days. Then they daisy chained right in front of me, and the guide said, "Cast to 10 o'clock on the circle." I did. I hooked a tarpon. I held because I'd never caught anything bigger than a 6-pound bass. And of course it broke off. But that was all part of my loving to be on the flats especially, and even today, as I head out from the dock and I can't see the land anymore, I say, this is where I want to be. Yeah. And it is. It's never diminished.
The late Joe Brooks, who was one of the early pioneers in saltwater fly fishing, talked to me and said, "You know, I'm going to set up a trip to Bermuda with Pete Parentchief for you, and you can catch a yellowfin tuna on fly. It hasn't been done, but I know that you can do it." And he sent me there. And when I landed this fish, it was 53 pounds, 6 ounces on what today would be 10-weight tackle from an anchored boat, stripped the reel twice, and I wound it all back. I hit the rod, which I don't know what it did, but the fish stopped, turned around, came back, and I landed them. And they thought it was a sick fish because they didn't believe it could be done. But then I went back the next year. I did it again, and I lost a fish at the boat. And the next day, a captain came on and threw a fly down and said to Pete Parentchief, "Have you ever seen a fly like this?" And I looked at that fly. I said, "I'll show you 11 more just like it." That was my fish that I lost at the boat. They caught it that afternoon, weighed 75 pounds.
And right across from this resort, you could sit up in the dining room, which was up in the second floor, and you could look out on a little island, and they had a bunch of monkeys on this island. And someone accused me of putting a sign on that island, which said the Islamorada Guide School. And I never really admitted that I had put up that sign on the island.
For 2 minutes, it was the worst fighting fish. After 2 minutes, it gave up, but it was the damnedest 2 minutes I ever had on a fly rod. The biggest fish I caught was only 38 pounds, and I think only about 10 or 12 people have caught them on flies to date. But, and they call it a river Rambo, which is a real good name for it. But it really is the strongest fish I've ever caught.
I had one particularly large mako, around 100 pounds. I had gutted this fish because I was bringing him home to eat. And I had him laying in the back of my Seacraft, and I'm by myself, and so I start running home to Redondo. And the boat starts to sputter, 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 and I'm going, what the heck is this? And I had twin outboards at the time, you know, for safety reasons. I'm just dead in the water now. And so I turn around to go tinker with the outboards. Well, this mako had bitten the fuel line clean in half. And even though the fish was gutted, and, you know, I just have a pair of shorts on, and I'm barefooted, and here I am running around the boat. This thing is trying to get its revenge. The mako was delicious, by the way.
Oh, I think one of the proudest things I've done was forming a nonstop corporation called Tarpon Unlimited. And I formed that corporation just to raise money for research for tarpon. There was very little research going on at that time. But now it's become a huge worldwide organization, Bonefish and Tarpon Trust. And so I'm very proud of that.
No one ever acted as if I was someone different, that I was a woman. And you know, in those early days, there were two women guides, Frankie Albright and Bonnie Smith. They were married to the guides, Jimmy Albright and Bill Smith. So they were already accepted as knowing what they were doing in saltwater. They were pioneers. And so I never, as long as I could cast, that has always been what has gotten me through. Whether I'm a good fisherman or not, you know, in terms of understanding the fish deeply, if I can cast, I'm accepted.
Back in those days, I think I was, matter of fact, I'm sure I was the very first one to witness this Bay of Honda wormhatch, which is the primary one, the big one. I managed to fish it year after year after year, and I kept the reasons why I could pick out the time. I can still prognosticate when it's going to happen 5 years from now or next year or whatever, because I know what it requires for it to happen, to be a good one. And I don't tell anybody. I've had a lot of people, friends, dear friends, say, come on, you got to tell me. I said, no, if you have an itch, go scratch.
I was on the board of directors, one of the founding members. And I looked at this and I said, you know, we need to standardize the tackle so that everybody is playing with a level playing field. They're all using tackle within the limits that are determined. And I said to the board, also, if we keep the records, then people will know what has been done, and they will be able to go out and either exceed the record or know that somebody else caught a larger fish. They said, that's a wonderful idea. Why don't you write the rules? I did that in 1965. We had a first national conclave in 1966 where we unveiled these rules. And I kept the records, and I was meticulous about them. I tested every leader. In fact, they have the testing machine here at IGFA that I used, and I tested every leader. And yeah, there were guys that got away with murder because they would take the tippet and they would scuff it on concrete, and I knew that, but I couldn't prove it. And where it broke, it broke. And I had a young family, and I had to disqualify some very wealthy and important people whom I could figure out that they had not caught the fish the way they said they did. And I woke up one day and I said, you know, if they wanted to ruin my life, all they have to do is call their attorneys and say, get that guy. And I'm dead. I couldn't defend myself. I walked into IGFA to Elwood Harry, who was the president at that time, and we used to have lunch together quite frequently. And I said, Elwood, have I got a deal for you? And I talked them into taking the world records. They've kept them ever since, and they're pretty much the rules that I wrote with very few changes.
The whole being in touch with the natural world as you fly fish, the whole catch and release aspect of fly fishing, I think is one of the messages that I've tried so hard over years to deliver, and hopefully it's found its way.
This kind of passion is what fly fishing is about. It's not only about catching the fish. You can't live for the moment of the strike. It's all of this. It's tying a fly, using your old reel. It's polling an old friend or your son and watching him catch a fish. It's all of that.